Welcome to CoBB, Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan. For this episode, we welcome our first ever guest, Mr. Bharath Sastry, the CEO of Vistaprint India. Over to our hosts. Enjoy.
A big hello to all our listeners. Today is a discontinuity on two fronts. One, you will get to see a video podcast, and two, we have brought along a guest, a mini celebrity, I would like to call him, somebody who Sharon and I have had the pleasure of working with when we were at Mondelez or Cadbury, and somebody whom we have seen very closely working on not just the core marketing function, handling a couple of very difficult categories, but also handling a function that is really core to marketing, which is insights. So, without further ado, let me just introduce Basha to you, or Mr. Bharath Sastry. Hi, Basha. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sudeep. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction. Great to catch up with friends after long.
Real pleasure to be having you on the podcast. Sharon and I have been thinking about wanting to get a guest, and we couldn't have thought of a better option to start off this with. So, welcome to the first episode of Copcast, where we have a guest.
That's great. That's great. I've listened to many of your podcasts, and they were like amazing, amazing.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank
Sharon,
you.
why don't you start us off with the first question?
Well, first question is an extension of the introduction. We know Basha heads Vistaprint in India, but before that, before we get into work and understanding marketing or anything else from him, the only other Basha I know is Rajnikant. Can we please know how Bharat Sastry became Basha?
Yeah, yeah. Back in college, guys, when we were actually in Chennai, and I mean, we were obviously into Rajnikant. We are still into Rajnikant now. So, I mean, one of my close friends in college happened to just call me Basha because he didn't want to call me Bharat Shastri. So he just said, "I just want to shorten your name." And we just watched Basha yesterday, so I'm going to call you Basha. So that just stuck. Actually, it's amazing because many of my campus mates, I mean, there'll be people from other hostels and all who won't know you, they still think that I am Basha. Many of the people back in Mondelez also, whom you've not interacted with for long, still think my name is Basha.
It's so much so that when I told my wife Bharat Sastry, she had no idea who I was talking about. So I had to say Basha. I said, oh, okay. So getting on, Basha. The entire show is about conversation in the business of brands. And you've been in it for over 20, 25 years now. Can you like give us a time lapse view of your career that's been for so long?
Yeah, sure. So I started off in Mondelez. And I started off like all marketers do. I mean, back then it was called Cadbury. So started off in sales, then started handling brands of Mondelez, which are some of the Cadbury brands, and then interestingly started looking at the business of brands, and which is what you call CoBB also, right? CoBB.
Yeah.
Very soon, I mean, back in Cadbury, you started looking at brands as businesses rather than brands as themselves. So, looking at business of brands where you got opportunities to look at the whole PLL of brands or companies with portfolio of brands. So, as I started growing in marketing, I was handling larger portfolios. Where in Indonesia, I was handling the whole marketing portfolio of Indonesia. And then after that, I moved into startups where again I was in the business of brands, trying to build brands. I was working with about 3 or 4 startups as CMO on Trap, trying to build their brands. And now I've been in Vistaprint for the last 7 years.
Wow. So before we progress, the first thing that comes to mind when talking to anybody from Cadbury are the campaigns that you've been part of. So, what are the most memorable campaigns you've been part of, brand campaigns that you've done?
Actually, there are so many of them that it's difficult to actually list a few. I mean, if I were to think about the campaigns in Cadbury, it was the 5-star campaign I remember back in 2003 actually, where we had a very different ad than what we used to do earlier, different campaign than what we used to do earlier, and it was actually to do with the relaunch of the brand. Yeah, we had changed the product fully. I mean, there were a lot of customer feedback which we had collected at that point of time, which talked about the product being sticky, and so hence we made it soft. The campaign which we launched, it was called Johnny Johnny, and that was one of the campaigns which was very different than what we used to do earlier. Earlier, you used to talk more about the imagery of five star, but we started rooting it completely on the product. That was the first time we talked about the product and what the product does to you. And also, the whole we changed the personality of the brand to make it more quirky and humorous, which is continued to this day. So that is one of the campaigns. Another one in Cadbury would be the Eclairs campaign, the chocolate ka meetha bomb one. So that was another memorable one, and that again was something where all parts of the mix changed. So the product changed, and we earlier used to not talk about the product, so we talked about the product and what it does to you. Interestingly, we framed the brand position also at that point of time. So we completely changed the brand positioning and got in the positioning of eclairs being a chocolate which actually gives you a moment to where you just give in. The campaign was also very different. It talked about a chocolate bursting in your head. So that was chocolate kabita bomb. So these were some of the campaigns.
Awesome. So this was the birthplace of Ramesh and Suresh with the five-star going the quirky route.
Yes. Before that, I mean that's where it actually started.
Awesome. Also, I think Ramesh and Suresh have got great fans.
I think both of them, Sharon. For example, when Bharat was talking about five-star relaunch and caramel being softer, I was reminded of the 2013 work that we did on eclairs, where we did exactly the same thing. To make it less sticky, we made the caramel softer. Similarly, when Basha did Chocolate Ka Meetha Bomb in 2009, I think many years later, when we were trying to romanticize the product of Rich Brownie, the 2 rupee variant, we actually did almost the same thing. It was just more than the Meetha Bomb, it was full orchestra because we wanted to show it even bigger than Bomb.
That's brilliant that you say that, because what's worked on one brand is been almost templatized to be used on another brand to serve a similar purpose. And one is at 1 rupee, 2 rupees versus 5 and 10 on five-star. That's awesome, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen the fountain work also. It's really amazing. I mean, actually, what's pretty interesting is fundamental product differences and campaigns that bring them alive in a simple manner really work wonders. And I'm sure, I mean, when you did these product changes, you would have seen the kind of say customer feedback and growth you would have got.
Correct. No, no, no doubt. Customer delight possibly is the best thing that a product can deliver. Everything else is just a medium of doing so. So no doubt about that, Basha. So Basha, from there, because you have just touched upon one of the things which you said, that if you are able to deliver this to the consumer. So my next question was about to be around the same thing, that while doing work on so many different brands across different geographies, uh, some brand principles that you have picked up, brand building principles that you've picked up, with some of our listeners who are startup founders or brand owners, business owners, you would want them to keep in mind when they are building their brands?
Sure. Actually, one of the things which I've learned, or one of the kind of templates, if you may say, which I've learned over time, in which I used to structure my own thoughts, is the brand ladder template. You may have heard of it, but there are different templates. I mean, when you look at brand positioning, there are many companies use different templates. I personally found it pretty simple and powerful. Actually, I mean that's why I use it. So I'll also try and share this brand ladder with you. So that's one of the tools I use. So this is actually what I use when start looking at brands. So it has a ladder. So there are insights right at the bottom, which is consumer insights or customer insights, which is actually what do customers really need, and trying to find out what is the truth in their lives. Yeah. Then you have the product features, which is the features of the particular brand or the product, and what benefits does it offer, which is functional benefits, which is what are the rational benefits do I get from it. So what do I get? And then there is the emotional benefits. So how does that make me feel? Yeah, so I've used this simple template across almost all my brands, and even now in Vistaprint to actually build the brand as we're talking about it. So when you look at this brand template, actually once you start framing it, once you start meeting customers, trying to find out their insights, and also try to build the brand ladder, slowly and surely the clarity about what your brand stands for, which is the brand positioning, becomes clear. So I've tried to also illustrate this with a with an example of Coke and what I called actually brand in a page. Like it's powerful for me because you can have the whole brand in one page.
Right.
So if you look at Coke, and I'm hypothesizing about some of the insights and benefits here. So the insight can be when I'm with friends, family, or I'm alone. It's great to have something to lift my mood. And Coke is a refreshing, fizzy, cold beverage, which is the best tasting cola, which is the functional benefit, which provides me happiness, which is the emotional benefit. And the brand position they've used over time was very simply open happiness.
Right.
So with this as the brand ladder, what I used to do for most of my brands was also put in the other things to make it the whole brand in a page, like the creative roots, which can change. Coke is right now using infectious laughter as one of the creative roots. The brand territory for Coke, it's youthful, social, joyful, and brand differentiators. Yeah. What I normally try to do is try to arrive at the brand in a page the first time we start handling brands, and that actually helped me a lot.
Awesome, Basha. Now, in this, if let's say if a startup person was to use it for their brand, for a new brand, where would they start? Should they start with the target audience, or should they start with the insight? Should they? But most of them have a product when they begin. So, is the ideal starting point for this?
Actually, I mean, this is much more useful for startups, and I'm glad you asked that. Because established brands, as you know, would have this in place. So when you want to put this in place for established brands, it's more about finding what already exists. Yeah.
Right.
And then trying to sharpen it and put it in a page. But for startups, actually, I mean, there is a chance where you'll be able to also create, right? Especially the emotional benefit part is what I felt,
Right.
where you could actually really create, and which needs a little bit of imagination too. But anyway, coming back to the starting point, I think you start with the insight first. So you'd start with meeting customers first. I mean, and that will be one of the most important things to do, which is meeting consumers or customers or people or like human beings or whatever you may call them. So meeting people and trying to find out what they do. Of course, in relation to the category that you're working in or to the brand that you're working in. So if you're working in beauty, you talk about that. If you're working in customization, you talk about that. Yeah. So try to talk and try to figure out what can be some of the insights. Yeah. Normally, you start with observations, like what customers say or do, and then when you try to figure out why they do it, yeah, and when you try to ask them why they do it, you tend to get into deeper insights. Yeah.
Right.
So figuring out the insight, I would say, would be the first thing. And for a startup, I mean, normally you would have the product features or some of them at least in place, right? So you would be having a kind of a product idea in place.
Right.
And then in the context of the insight, we'll have to start delving deeper into what the product actually delivers to the customer or the consumer. So what do you get from the product? And then you move into functional benefits, and which is the next step of the ladder. And then once you start asking them about how do you feel about it, yeah, then you start getting the more emotional benefits. And once you have this in place for a startup, I think it's pretty powerful, because it gives a lot of direction to what you do for the whole business, and what you stand for. And it's also pretty inspiring for employees in a startup.
True.
When you say that my brand stands for enhancing the joy, or something like that, I mean, it really is pretty inspiring. And believe me, it works wonders. I mean, once you do it in startup, it works real wonders.
Hmm. Nice. No, I think it makes a lot of sense, Basha. I would possibly add one more thing, Sharon, to this, where, like Basha says, if you are able to arrive at a great articulation of what your product delivers emotionally and functionally to the consumer, I think a lot of the startup owners are worried that how do I get it right the first time? Yeah.
True.
And one of
True.
the things that we discussed was that you make your best attempt, And all of these are iterative. Over a period of time, consumers will tell you what is the best articulation they like, and therefore you
Right.
can then start moving around them. But don't put the pressure on yourself to get it perfect the right time around, because the consumer layers also unravel over a period of time. What do you think, Basha?
I think that's a great point. And normally, I mean, you try to actually get this so much to perfection, and you're looking at all other brands. You're looking at Coke. You're looking at Nike. You're looking at some of the Indian big brands, and trying to see that you want to get it perfect, but needn't work that way. As long as you have a benefit that is resonating, however you articulate it, it's going to build your brand. So start communicating the benefit in whatever you have articulated it as, because it's going to start building the brand from scratch. And as Sudeep said, as you keep iterating, you tend to become better. You tend to become more sharper at articulating it, and you can start building it. But the important thing is to once have it in place, and once if it resonates, start communicating.
That's the end of the first part of the interview. To watch the next part, please click next or the video displayed here on the end screen. Thank you for watching CoBB. Conversations on the Business of Brands with Sudeep Chawla and Sharvana Raghavan.